Hey everyone, it's Sean. I'm here at Proust and it's time for another Animal Facts Day. So today I have a really cool guest with me because we don't often see this snake come through because of the size that it gets. Now, before I bring out this special guest, I'm going to explain a couple things. So we're going to talk about the difference between pythons and boas. Typically when someone hears these names, they automatically assume gigantic snakes, especially when they hear boa or boa constrictor. First things that come to mind are these gigantic 10, 20 foot snakes are going to constrict whatever they're going after and suffocating to death and then eating them. But the fact of the matter is most snakes constrict. In fact, almost every snake is going to constrict at some point, unless it's a little tiny snake like a brown snake or a baby garter snake that's eating earthworms or insects. But for the most part, even snakes that we find around here like rat snakes or down south with corn snakes, they also constrict their prey. Now, people always assume that pythons and boas are the biggest of all snakes, which sometimes they are, but they also have little tiny variations. Their boas and pythons are only get like this big in the world. People think that constrictors are often way bigger than pythons, and that also depends on the particular type of species. Really, the major difference between a python and a boa is that pythons lay eggs and boas give live birth. Some snakes give live birth, some lay eggs. It really depends on the type of snake and where they're from. So the snake I'm bringing out for you today is a boa constrictor. Now, in the pet trade and sometimes in zoos, you'll just see something labeled common boa or boa constrictor or boa constrictor imperator. The differences in these have to do with the exact locale of where this boa constrictor is from. This type of boa constrictor is from South America, but there's close to, I believe, a dozen subspecies of this type of snake, all ranging in sizes and colors depending on where they're from. So the one that I have today is sometimes called a red-tailed boa because out in the wild, the blotches on its tail start to mend together and get really close, and they're usually bright red or orange. But it's also called a common boa because if it doesn't really have those red ones, it's actually a different subspecies. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab this girl and show her to you. Oh, come here. She's a little camera shy because she was a rescue from us. So this one, I would just call a common boa because when we look at her tail, although there's some reddish in there, it's mainly just brown. A true red-tailed boa would actually have a lot more red colorization in there and also be larger. True red-tailed boas easily reach 10 feet, sometimes up to 12. But these common boas are usually, if they're females, going to be somewhere between 7 and 9 feet long, or if they're males, 6 to 8 feet long. So, my wingspan is just over 6 feet long. So as you can see, this snake is easily probably 7 to 7.5 feet long. So it is a female common boa. Now, they can be pretty good pets and they can be pretty laid back as well. She is a little wound up just because she's not used to being handled that much. Again, she was a rescue snake. She came to us a little bit underweight and we don't know much about her past, but she's been eating very well for us and getting back on track. And the next step is just getting her used to being handled. Now, if you notice as I'm handling this large snake, there's a couple things that I do or don't do. One of the things I don't do is wrap the snake around my neck. So if I do put the snake around my neck, there's something special I always do, and that's this. That way I can try to break the snake free and get the snake off of my neck. We sometimes hear stories about snakes wrapping around people's necks, and that's because they're being a cold-blooded animal, they want to warm up. Well, we lose 90% of our body heat through our neck and our head. So this is naturally a big heating pad, especially right now with having had my mask around my neck and having a hat on, it's really warm there. I don't want to put her on my neck because if she was cool enough, she would end up wanting to wrap around my neck to gain up all that body heat I'm putting off, and she could inadvertently squeeze too hard. The other is I don't really grab at her. Notice I'm just kind of letting her slither through. The only thing I'm really doing is giving her support. Notice I keep my hands up so she can't lock my wrist down. I always like to do that, and if I have to, I can just pick up her tail and kind of hold it, and then shift it over to another one. Ideally, I usually try to have at least one hand free if I can. And now you're getting under a chair. The problem with handling a large snake is obviously they're gonna try to get into whatever they feel like. Right now, she wrapped herself around a chair, which is fine. So that brings us to, oh, hey, look, you can see the chair in the camera. Snakes are very, very strong. So I talked about sometimes they can wrap around you, and what we would have to do, if you unwrap from the tail first, you see she just completely unwinds like a hose. If a snake ever manages to wrap itself around you, that's all you have to do is grab it by the tail and unwind like a hose. It's good to always be calm around these animals as well. Sometimes the more wound up you get, the more wound up they get. Now, if I wanted her to sit more still, I might do something like put her on my neck, but again, I don't feel like that's always safe, and I don't recommend it. If you have a pet snake at home and you feel very comfortable with that animal, you can, but you have to remember, it's not always going to work out. Sometimes even pet dogs bite, so sometimes a pet snake can bite or wrap too hard. Mainly, I just keep open hands and open arms and let her slither around and do what she wants to do. Now, as I mentioned, the strength, she can easily hold her entire body up just with her tail. Notice she's trying to find a way to wrap the tail around. She's bringing her head right back up, going over top of my arm. This is what they would do out in the wild in order to gain better balance while climbing trees and going over branches. I always like to say that the amount of strength that a snake has would be like if we tried to do a chin up, but we used just our pinky and pulled our whole body up over top of the bar. That would basically be the way that a snake can hold its entire body and pull it up like this. She's pretty heavy. We haven't weighed her, but I'm gonna guess she's around 15, 20 pounds at least. So it doesn't seem like that heavy, but when she's hanging on your arm for a long period of time, it can start to weigh you down a little bit. Snakes eat in very, very unique ways. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, almost every snake constricts. So for most snakes, we look at how big around they are at their thickest point. So she's about that big around. That's about how big around she likes her food to be. And what she can do is she can stretch the skin under her jaw, which I don't know if she'll let me show you. You can kind of see there's a line right there. So that skin is super stretchy. It's kind of like the skin on our elbows. It's meant to stretch out. So all that skin under her jaw and along her neck stretches out to the size of the animal that she's trying to eat. And then as it makes her way down her throat, the muscles constrict around it and squeeze it together and make it small enough that it can go through the rest of her digestive tract. Now, a snake like this would probably eat a couple large rats or even a small guinea pig. Guinea pigs are a common animal where they're found, and they're a major food source for a lot of snakes. And with her size, she might only have to eat once a month. That's kind of the cool thing about snakes. Sometimes they eat once a week or every few days, depending on if they're a smaller snake or a bigger one. And sometimes that they can go months without eating any food. They can kind of control their metabolism based on the fact that they're a cold-blooded animal. The cooler out it is, the slower their metabolism is going to be, so they don't have to eat as often. The warmer it is, they can speed it up and they can eat more. They go through cool seasons and dry seasons out in the wild, and they'll slow their metabolism down to match the season, so they don't have to eat as much. So, snakes are really fun. There's not much to really be scared of with a big snake like this, as long as you know your stuff, you're confident with them, you learn the snake's body language. I'm sure as you've noticed watching the video, the longer she's been out, the more comfortable she's gotten. She's really slowed a lot of her movement down. She's starting to realize that I'm not a predator. I'm not here to hurt her. The other was she got a good grip on my arm and feels safe and can hold herself up now. So she's getting a bit more comfy and just kind of slowly exploring everything around. So, want your close-up? One of my favorite things, and this is true with a lot of snakes, is the pattern on their face will end up matching the pattern going through their eyes. And then of course she's using that tongue to smell everything. Snakes smell by pheromones, so there's tons of chemicals in the air. We put out chemicals all the time out of our bodies. There's fear chemicals, there's happy chemicals, and everything else, and her tongue actually detects those. And it goes to a special part of her brain called the Jacobson's organ, and it basically interprets what those smells are. So she can tell the difference between every animal in this room strictly by their smell. So we'll go ahead and give you guys another look at how big she is. Again, she's just over 7 feet because my wingspan is just over 6 feet. She's just making herself comfy, I look like I'm doing yoga poses or stretches here. She'd actually be a good snake to work out with. She had some nice good weight. But she's a big snake and super comfy with me right now, so cool. Well, I hope you guys learned a little something about snakes and about the difference between boas and pythons, and that just because it's a large snake or has the name boa in it or boa constrictor doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a mean or aggressive snake. They can actually be very, very nice. We just have to take the time to learn about them and to get to know them. Don't we, sweetie? Yes, you're a good girl. All right, have a good day.